Parshas Noach opens up with a tremendous insight into who Noach is. Keep in mind the fact that Noach is the single individual from which Hashem built the rest of humanity. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us there were 10 generations. From Adam all the way till Noach, 10 full generations, not a single human being found favor in Hashem's eyes. V'Noach matza chen be'inei Hashem. And as a matter of fact, the Tosfos Yontif explains that the time span between Adam and the Mabul was 1,656 years. Bereshis goes rather quickly, but it's very clear that it's an awful lot of time, and the single individual who found favor in Hashem's eyes was Noach. Not only did he find favor, he was the individual to be saved. He saved his family, and typically we misunderstand who this man was. Usually, you'll read the first Rashi in Chumash, and you'll see Noach was Ish Tzadik Haya B'Dorosav. He was a tzaddik in his generation, and people misunderstand. Nefesh HaChaim explains that Noach was an extraordinary tzaddik to the following extent. We now keep every mitzvah because we have a Torah that directs us and shows us how to do it. We wear tzitzits, we do not wear shatnez, we eat kosher. Oftentimes we do not understand the background, the reason, the effects of it, but we do it because that's what it brought down. The Avos will makayim every one of the mitzvahs in the Torah. And Nefesh HaChaim explains to us that Noach was told, take the behemoth tahoras, take 7 and 7. The behemoth tameas you're to take 2 of. The behemoth tahoras take 7 and 7. But the problem is that no one told Noach what was a behemoth tahora and what was a behemoth tamea. No one informed him which one was pure, which one was impure, which to take. Mikan, says Rashi, Mikan shelamad Noach Torah. From here we see that Noach learned Torah, meaning he understood this. And the Nefesh HaChaim explains what this means. He says the Avos were Makayim, fulfilled every mitzvah in the Torah, but not because they were commanded in it, not because they were told to do it, but because they understood the effect and the impact of every action. Meaning to say, when Avram Avinu kept Erev Tavshilin, he understood the impact of that action. When he didn't eat tray food, he didn't do it because he understood that ingesting this food into my being damages me. The Avos fulfilled every mitzvah in the Torah because they understood the impact and the effect of the mitzvahs, meaning the exact opposite of what we do. We keep the external because we're commanded. Rare it is that we ever understand the internal. The Avos began from the exact opposite. They fully understood the gravity, the impact, the effect of every mitzvah, hence they kept every mitzvah, and they didn't do averos for that reason. It says in Nefesh HaChaim, that's exactly why Hashem said to Noach, take the behemoth tahoras. Noach was commanded to bring karbonos, and he was able to understand which animal would be appropriate for which carbon. A sheep is appropriate for shlomim because he divined the essence of the sheep, the nature of it. He understood why that would be appropriate and proper for carbon, and he didn't need any further tzivuyim, any further commandments. He understood it absolutely intuitively. The reason for this is because the Avos, Noach included in that, were on an extremely, extremely high level. Now, that being said, Noach received a nevuah. Hashem said to him that Kilyamim od shiva, in 7 more days, on imam tir al aretz, for I'm going to bring rain on the ground, arbaim yom v'arbaim laila. In 7 more days there's going to be a deluge, a flood, there's going to be a mabul. But this was the first time in the Torah that we're told about Noach's nevuah. This was a nevuah, meaning to say Noach was on an extraordinary high level. A novi, the Rambam explains to us, is a person who gets beyond every physical limitation. He's able to directly hear from Hashem. Noach was such an individual, and Hashem told him that he's going to destroy the land, the machisias kolekum, all that I've established, all that I've built out, I'm going to destroy. And Noach understood this. 7 days later, when the rain is really pouring down, Noach, his wife, his children went into the teva because of the waters of the Mabul. And Rashi is bothered by the obvious diak. It's clear that Noach went into the teva because of the waters. Meaning to say, he was waiting, and once the waters forced him in, then he went in. As a matter of fact, the Midrash tells us, he didn't just go in. It was when the water began rising, whether it was to his ankle or to his thighs, only then did they enter the teva. Says Rashi, Af Noach miktani amuna. You see that Noach also was small in Amunah, Hayamamin, Veinomamin, he believed and he didn't believe, Sheyavo Hamabel, that the Mabel would come. Lo nichnas l'teva, he didn't enter the teva, and shedachko mayim, until the water forced him. So Rashi is telling us a very interesting concept. Noach was a mamin and an eino mamin. He believed and he didn't believe. And if you think about that, that's a rather difficult concept. Here's a man who we're told is a tzaddik, tomim b'dorosov, a man who receives a direct nevuah from Hashem. He hears very clearly and exactly when Hashem says, I will destroy the earth. And he knows it. And yet, says Rashi, he believed it and he didn't believe it because he was mamin ve'ino mamin, he was miktani emuna. And when you hear this, you have to sort of wonder what's pshat. And I'll explain to you what I mean. We're accustomed to this idea amongst our own people. Meaning people of our ilk, our level, we're accustomed to the idea of believing and not believing. How many times do you say over and over, Hashem runs the world, Hashem runs the world, and then the doctor gives you even a sort of sideways glance and, oh my goodness, am I going to die? And all of a sudden there's fear, there's real pachad. You open the papers and you start reading about the stock market crashing, and people have this panic effect. And we're familiar with this concept that we believe and we don't believe. We know that Hashem runs the world, but it's sort of difficult to really relate to. But the problem is that this Rashi is speaking about no one less than a tzaddik, tomim b'dorosov, a man who was the single person that Hashem brought the rest of humanity out from. This was the ultimate tzaddik. This was a person who surely got it, and yet we're being told that he was mamin and eino mamin. And I think if we study the events, the story of Noach a bit more, the question gets a lot deeper. And let's spend a minute or two analyzing some of the events that led up to this, and I think we'll see how powerful this question is. One point that's brought out very clearly by almost all the Rishonim is that Noach was asked to build a teva. Now a teva is an ark, and an ark is a rather strange thing to ask a man to build. Keeping in mind the fact that Hashem had a very clear plan. The plan was kill the rest of the world, keep these 8 individuals alive. Now Hashem has many, many ways to accomplish that. Hashem could bring various magefas, various plagues, various natural catastrophes. There are many, many ways that Hashem could eliminate the rest of the world and keep these 8 people alive. Ask Rashi the question, why is it that Hashem was matriach, bothered this tzaddik to build a teva? It says Rashi, there are many ways that Hashem could have saved him, yet the reason why Hashem asked Noach to build a teva was one specific reason, so that the people in his generation should see him building this teva. They'll ask him, what are you doing? He'll say the words, Hashem is going to destroy the world. Unless you do tshuva, Hashem is going to destroy the world. And says Rashi, that's the reason why Noach was asked to build this teva. And if you think about that, that's rather interesting. Because a teva is a large boat. And the Medrash tells us it took him 120 years. He first began by planting the cedar trees. He would plant them and water them, and not a single cedar tree, but rows and rows of them. He was a well-known individual in his time. Every morning he went out and watered these cedar trees. People would say, Noach, what are you doing? Oh, I'm planning to build this ark, this boat. Why are you doing that? Well, because Hashem is going to kill you. Unless you do tshuva, Hashem is going to kill you. And these cedar trees grew and grew until they were fully mature. He then cut them. He then planed them. He then lined up the wood. He built this huge teva. For 120 years, he was a mochiach of his generation. He gave musar. He taught everybody that there's going to be a mabel. Unless you do tshuva, it's going to happen. And yet, again, we're being told that he didn't believe it. If he gave speeches for 120 years, how's it shayach that he didn't believe it? But really, when you delve into a few more details, you see it becomes even more problematic. He didn't have children until he began this. He was 500 years old when he didn't have a child yet. It wasn't, the Shmuz explains to us, it wasn't until he had the merit of being the mochiach, of teaching his generation about doing tshuva, that he merited having children. He begins this project instantly. He goes from childless to having 3 children, one after another. And keep in mind one very critical point. When he built the teva, he was 500. When he walked into the teva, he was 600 years old. Now, if you put this in perspective, I think it's an obvious point. Rav Moshe Feinstein was a tremendous person at the age of 40. But there's no question at the age of 60 he was much greater, and at the age of 80 you could not compare the two. Because a person matures, and as great as you are at 20 or 30, you're a different person at 60 or at 80. Noach was not 80, nor 100, nor 200. He was 600 years old, something that's beyond our frame of reference. But he spent years and years as a perfect tzaddik, davening, learning, serving Hashem. He had absolute faith as a human being could possibly have. He grew, and he reached such heights that it's beyond our comprehension. Every mitzvah was intuitive. Every mitzvah he fulfilled because he understood its effect. And yet, this single man is being told that something's going to happen by Hashem, and he doesn't believe it. And one more step to sort of round out the question. The pasuk is very clear that Noach is commanded to bring the various animals. Bring 2 of the tahora, 2 of the tameah, 7 of the tahora animals. Now, if you're asked to bring sheep, goat, cows into a teva, all right, I guess you could probably manage to figure out how to do it. But Noach is being asked to go out into the wild and bring forth everything from the baboons to the monkeys, to the zebra, to the giraffe, to the hippo, to the elephants. And you have to ask yourself the question, how is he expected to accomplish that? How is a single man expected to enter the jungle and capture all the various animals and bring them into the teva? But even worse, Rashi explains to us very clearly that it wasn't just man who veered off his path. The way that a human uses the world changes the world. And each of the animals had begun veering off the path of nature. And the various animals began mating outside of their species. Hashem commanded Noach, don't just bring me 2 hippos. Bring me from those species, and the particular ones in the species, who did not mate outside of their own species. So find the donkeys, find the horses, find the giraffes that did not mate outside of their animal species. And there you have to wonder, there is no way that he can know that. What is he supposed to walk over? Mrs. Swan, have you been faithful? Did you go outside of your bonds? How could a human being know that? And the Medrash tells us that quite simply he couldn't know it, and he couldn't possibly bring him into the teva. Rather, there was a nace that was to unfold. And that nace was during the first day of the 7 days when the rain began falling down. The various animals began coming from the woods, from the forest, all coming to this teva. And not only did they come to this teva, the teva only accepted those animals that were pure, that had remained proper to the species. Only those were welcomed. But the bears, tigers, the giraffes all came in by the 2s and by the 7s into this teva, marching in. And you have to appreciate that that's a rather miraculous event. But not only did the animals begin getting it, as the rain began coming down, it began on day 1 of Hashem's warning, but it continued for another 6 days. The race, the human race, began getting it. You see, for 120 years, Noach was telling everyone there's going to be a mabul. Hashem is going to destroy the world. The various people, when they would hear Noach say that, would say to him, it's not going to happen. But it was happening. And everyone began getting it. And people began crowding around the teva, and what they basically told Noach is, we're taking over. At which point Hashem sends the dubim va'arayas, the bears and the lions, form a ring around the teva. They form a perfect ring that no human being can enter, so that Noach and his family can enter the teva, and only those animals that should join them should join them. And what you begin to see is a picture of a rather unique and remarkable event. But there's one more step that sort of puts the icing on the cake. Rabbeinu Bachai asks a very specific question. He says, we are told the exact dimensions of the teva. 300 amas long, 50 amas wide, and 30 amas tall. You may wonder, why do we, thousands of years later, need to know the exact dimensions of the teva? Says Rabbeinu Bachai, there's a very specific lesson the Torah is teaching us. An amma is basically the measurement from your elbow to the tip of the middle finger of an average person. Let's call it 2 feet. Says Rabbeinu Bachai, let's assume for a minute the teva is 600 feet long, 100 feet wide, and 60 feet tall. If you do the math, you'll quickly recognize that there's no way that the amount of animals that Noach was asked to bring into that teva could possibly fit into that teva. If you watch the circus, when Barnum and Bailey moves from city to city, they take 2 elephants and stuff them into the back of a tractor-trailer truck. That tractor-trailer is 55 feet long, 11 feet wide, because 2 elephants fill that full volume. But if you have 600 feet in length and 100 feet in width and only one floor is for the animals, you can't possibly get in the zebras, the giraffes, the rhinos, the horses, the cows, the wildebeests. Says Rabbeinu Bachai, 50 such tevas could not possibly hold all of the species that Adam was asked to bring in. The Bronx Zoo, by the way, is 265 acres, and they have but a minute amount of the species on the earth. Says Rabbeinu Bachai, there's no way he could have gotten these animals in. Why does the Torah tell us the exact dimensions? To show us the nace, the extraordinary miracle, that apparently as these huge, large animals were brought in, they were miniaturized. This huge 15,000-pound elephant crunched down. This 19-foot tall giraffe. And if you can imagine that for 120 years Noach is building this teva knowing that there's going to be a miracle of extraordinary proportions. He's measuring out each room. He's measuring out the exact dimensions, and he knows that the animals can't fit in. He has perfect bitachon. He knows that Hashem told him to build it. He knows that somehow the animals will get in there. So here's the question. We're dealing with a tzaddik, Tamim B'Darasav, a man who for 120 years preaches one message: Hashem will bring the mabul. For 120 years he's engaged in an activity that clearly shows his level of bitachon. He sees miracle after miracle. He sees each animal come forth. Somehow those animals miraculously fit in, and he doesn't enter the teva until the water comes up to his thighs because he doesn't believe. And what you hear is a rather perplexing concept. And I'd like to see if we could sort of bring some light to bear on this question. And to do that, I'd like to share with you an interesting thought. As a kid, I was involved in martial arts. And not every martial artist is what we call an Einstein, and some are particularly not Einsteins. There was one fellow who was a very talented black belt who was definitely not an Einstein. He decided that he wanted to show whether the world or himself how tough he was. So he decided that he was going to break his thumb with a hammer. Okay. As the story goes, and this is supposed to be a Maisa Shaya, he puts his thumb, and now he has to understand he got psyched, he got ready. This was not just something you just wake up on a Tuesday and do. He planned it, and he got ready for it. He takes his thumb, puts it on a secure, strong table, takes the hammer and smashes. Boom! But he didn't break his thumb. It wasn't hard enough. So he picked the hammer up a second time. Boom! And he succeeded in breaking his thumb. And he proved to the world how stupid he was. Now, if you could break your thumb with a hammer, it's interesting, but it's really not a very bright thing to do. As a matter of fact, don't try this at home, folks. It's not really the kind of thing that you win, like, the brightness award for. It really isn't very smart. But you see, here's the point. Smart people don't damage themselves. Smart people don't take hammers, smash themselves in the thumb. Smart people don't do things to hurt themselves. And that became a major issue, Kaviyachal, that could be when Hashem created Adam. You see, when Hashem created man, here was the difficulty. Adam was so brilliant, so insightful, that the Malachim looked at him and mistook him for Hashem. Hashem brought forth every one of the animals in creation and asked the Malachim, tell me the essence of this animal. Define it for me. Give it a name that isn't just a title. If I call this a table, it doesn't reflect the essence of the table. It's just a moniker. It just sort of fits it in some way. Adam was asked to give a defining term. The Malachim first were asked, give a defining term to each animal. They were stumped. They couldn't do it. Hashem brought the animals in front of Adam, one after another. This is a sus. This is a gamal, this is a para. He defined the essence, the nature, the very, very fabric of the nefesh habahami and the nefesh that's contained in that animal with one word. When the Malachim saw this, they saw the brilliance of Adam and they were awed by it. So here's the problem. How do you give such a man bechira? How do you give him free will? If you put him into this earth and you tell him, don't do anything that's destructive, don't do anything that's damaging, obviously he's not going to do it, but he doesn't have free will. He's going to not do it, but it's not by his choice. And I'll explain to you what I mean. And the Mesil Sharm asks the following question. What does the word yiras hachet mean? Typically you hear the word yiras hachet, fear of sin. I guess it means you fear this sin. Oh my goodness, it's a fearful thing. Or maybe you fear punishment. Hashem's going to hit me over the head. It says in the Shalom that's incorrect. The definition of yira sachet means I recognize that this sin damages me. I recognize this act is damaging to me, hurts me, changes me, permanently makes me into a different human being, and I fear this act because I recognize its impact. That being said, here was a dilemma that Hashem faced. You take this neshama that's brilliant, that's amazingly insightful, put it into this earth and give it free will, it will never sin. Why? Because Adam is so bright, so intelligent, that he will see the things in front of him and he'll never be tempted. Much like I would never be tempted to take a hammer and smash my thumb, Adam would never be tempted to sin. To allow for free will, Hashem took the neshama, put it into a guf, and made a tremendous mapecha, and tremendous darkening. The neshama is cloaked in this heavy coat of physicality, and it cannot see. The reality is that you and I oftentimes get it, and then we fall sound asleep. We'll be in the middle of Shemona Esrei davening, talking literally to Hashem right there, and then my mind is 3,000 miles away. And then I come back, and then I'm gone. 1 minute I intensely feel Shabbos, and the next minute it's like it never was. And when you begin studying the human, you see that we're very, very mixed up. There's an awful lot of stuff going on within us that was not by accident, that was very much by design. That is the way that Hashem gave Adam, gave man free will. You see, free will doesn't mean in theory you could do a certain act, as in taking a hammer and breaking a thumb. Free will means that you're right there, you could just as easily do this, just as easily do that, and you make the choice. But to give the human that choice, there had to be something that was very real and making it a very real temptation. To do that, Hashem took the neshama, put it into a body, and now in this mixed up state of sort of physical, sort of spiritual, I don't know if I'm coming, I don't know if I'm going, I'm always in this quasi sort of state of getting it, Adam is now allowed to function. And if you'd like to understand why it is that we humans have so many quirks and we do so many strange things, it's for one reason. We are comprised of two competing parts. There's a neshama that's pure, that's holy, that gets it, and there's a part of me that couldn't care less. There's a part of me that's absolutely physical, dumb, and the I whom speaking to, mixed up, made of both, and I sit there in this state. That is the answer for Noach. You see, Noach was an ish tzaddik, but there are two words there, ish tzaddik. Tzaddik means a very righteous man, ish means a human being. A human being will always, as long as a human being is in this world, will always have these states of delusion, the states of getting it. Sometimes I'm there, sometimes I'm not, because that is the existence of a human. And the chiddush from this Rashi is profound, because we're talking about a man who spent 120 years teaching his generation it's going to happen, and he got it and he didn't get it. He saw miracle after miracle and he got it and he didn't get it. He was mamin ve'eno mamin despite all that he had seen, despite the animals marching in, despite the dubim varayas, the bears and the lions surrounding the teva, despite everything he saw, he still didn't totally believe because he was guilty of being a human. And when you understand this, I think you get a very different perspective on why it is we are the way we are. I find it almost ironic. You could have girls who will learn Shmiras HaLashon daily, religiously, and while they're learning, they'll speak Lashon Hara. What? I'm sorry, what are you doing? The answer is, what you're doing is you're being a human. Because as much as we human beings get it, we do and we don't. We remember, we forget. If you ever watch a man who's making a living, and he's doing very well, and he's really, really doing very nicely, and people come over to him and say, wow, it must be your MBA. No, it's Hashem. It must be your business acumen. No, it's Hashem. And he's making money hand over fist, and throughout the entire years and years of his success, he keeps saying the words, it's Hashem, and you're impressed. Look at this Baal B'tochen, what a great guy. Then Circuit City opens across the street from his store. I'm dead! What happened to your B'tochen? What happened to your Emunah? What happened to your belief? The answer is, again, he's guilty of being a human being. You see, it's very easy to say the words, it's Hashem. It's very easy on some level to recognize that Hashem runs the world. But as long as I am a human being, there's going to be this confusion. There's going to be this getting it and not getting it. There's going to be this mamin veino mamin. And Noach was again guilty of that very sin, being a human being. And the chiddush is, when you see it to such an extent, it's very, very eye-opening. If you'd like to really understand the human, you have to watch a guy when he gets drunk on Purim. And it's really a very interesting scene, especially if it's the first time he's been drunk and he doesn't really know how to handle himself. And Shlomi, watch out! Shlomi, what are you doing? I want to play in traffic. Shlomi, you can't play in traffic. Yes, I can. Shlomi, you're going to get hit by a car. Yeah, I know, I'm going to get hit by a car. Shlomi, you're going to get hit by a car and splatter. Yeah, it's so cool. I'm going to get hit by a car and splatter. Shlomi, what are you doing? Don't you understand? You're going to get hit by a car and die. It's okay. I'm going to get hit by a car. That is a very strange phenomenon. That's a person who's drunk. He'll say the words, I'll get hit by a car, but he doesn't get it. He'll say the words, I'll splatter, but he doesn't get it. He does and he doesn't. That's an extreme case because the guy is drunk. But the reality is that is us throughout our daily life. We can mouth the words, I believe that Hashem created the world and runs the world. I believe that not a single drop of pain is meted out without Hashem's direct involvement. And while I say those words, all that has to happen is one person says the wrong line to me. How dare you? I thought you were talking about Hashem. I thought no one insults you unless Hashem means it. I thought that everyone's just a pawn in Hashem's game. Those are words until I'm in the thick and the thin, until I'm in the real world, and then all of a sudden it's a different world. And that is because we are drunk in this body. It's not our fault. It's the way Hashem created us. But when you understand this, you begin to understand what the avoda is. The avoda, our job in life, is to wake up. Our job in life is to have clarity of vision, to understand it, to review it often and often, over and over, until there's an absolute clarity, until we see it. And as much as we see it, we'll never fully get it, but it's definitely something that a person can work on. I was downtown Manhattan when I got to see a very, very interesting sight. As a boy, growing up in the United States of America, I was a little bit of a fan of cars. I think it's in the blood of an American boy. And I happen to like certain cars, and I don't like certain other cars. If you ask me, if you take a very nice car and you stretch it, they literally, stretch limo means they cut it in the middle and stretch the two pieces out. If you take a very nice car and stretch it, it makes it ugly. Okay. It happens to be, of all the cars, the one car that's really, really ugly is the Rolls Royce. It's just a ugly car. Now, it happens to be different paints will also affect the color and will change the way a car looks. I was standing in Manhattan with my son when we were passed by a stretch Rolls Royce that was salmon color. I can't think of a worse color for a car imaginable, the color of locks. And I said to my son, somebody spent an awful lot of money to impress us, but they did a lousy job. And when you start seeing where people put their money, what you start seeing is a very strange phenomena. People invest an awful, awful lot of energy, time, and resource into this thing called kavod, my honor. I have a name. I have a reputation. When I make my son's bar mitzvah, it's going to be on 2 decks of a yacht. We're going to take out a major yacht because for my son's bar mitzvah, $200,000 is not enough to spend. Why is that? If you knew who I was, you'd understand why it's appropriate and proper. And when you see people doing very, very strange things in the name of honor, in the name of kavod, what you're starting to see is a human being who really clearly doesn't get it, a human being who's very mixed up, very confused, but what you're seeing is exactly this point. You're seeing a human being who fully, fully believes he will live forever. The current state that I'm in now is the only state that matters. It's the state of existence that I'll always be in. Hence my honor, my reputation is very, very big. Who I am is my name, and people spend an awesome amount of money, effort, and energy in keeping that. And when you realize how fleeting life is, and when you realize how quickly we humans leave the planet, what you recognize is that the human is a very strange person. The same human being can understand that in 24 hours the bar mitzvah is over, gone, and forgotten with, but he'll spend so much energy because in that moment he so much feels it. He's so alive with that drunken sense of my honor, my reputation is who I am, and that state is a very clear example of the confusion. I think there's a tremendous lesson to learn from Noach. Noach was an tzaddik, but even in that state, despite spending year after year, he was mamin v'eno mamin, because that is the human. And the work upon us is to get it, to understand we're here for a few short years, we're here to grow, we're here to accomplish. Hashem runs the world, but it's not just to be played as lip service, it's to be understood, it's to be felt, it's to become part of my reality. Making it part of my reality is to be a real mamin and to grow level after level. I'd like to close with a story that I think encapsulates one concept here. The Bluzhever Rebbe was a great Hasidic Rebbe in pre-World War II Europe, and he also spent the war years in various labor camps and concentration camps under the Nazi regime. He spent a good while in the Janowska Road camp, and he told over many events that happened there. One of the events circled around the day of Yom Kippur. A few of the Hasidim who had known him from before the war came to him on Erev Yom Kippur and said, Rebbe, we have to find a way not to work. Tomorrow is Yom Kippur. There's no way the Nazis aren't going to let us work. The Bluzhever Rebbe said, we have one hope. The kapel, the fellow who was in charge, was a Jewish fellow. His name was Schneeweiss, who was known to be more brutal and more vicious than the Nazis themselves. And the only way that they could not work the next day was to approach this Schneeweiss and ask him for permission. In any case, as it turns out, the Bluzhever Rebbe said, we can't do it, it's too risky. His Hasidim begged him and begged him. Finally, he went to Schneeweiss, and he went over to him and he said as follows, I don't know if you know who I am, but I was a Hasidic Rebbe before the war. Schneeweiss apparently recognized him. I have one request. Tomorrow is Yom Kippur. I'd like to request that we don't work. Now the Bluzhever Rebbe knew that Schneeweiss back in Poland was openly desecrating Shabbos and Yom Kippur. He couldn't care less. And the Bluzhever Rebbe knew that what he was doing was taking his life in his hands. Schneeweiss looked back at him and said, I can't do anything about tonight, but let me look about tomorrow. Come back to me. In any case, the next day, on the day of Yom Kippur, the Rebbe and a few of his Hasidim were assigned to a particular barracks where their job was dictated directly by Schneeweiss. Schneeweiss told them, you get on the floor and polish the floor with a rag without any polish on it. You polish the windows with a dry rag. He gave each of them the job to do without any violation of a malacha involved. A very curious event. They're working in the barracks. They're trying to somehow mutter davenings of Yom Kippur as the day goes on. At 12 o'clock noon, the door bursts open. Two Nazis in full regala burst in with a tray, an entire cart with trays of food on it. In all of their years in the concentration camps, in the road camps, they had never seen that much food. The Nazis with smiles on their face say, Jews, today's a special day for you. We must all eat. Everyone stopped what they were doing. No one would move. The Nazi said, you, come and eat. And the Jew wouldn't move. Schneeweiss, Nazi calls out to the kapel, tell the dirty Jew to eat or I'm going to kill him. Schneeweiss calmly looks at the Nazi and says, it's Yom Kippur. On this day we Jews don't eat. Schneeweiss, did you hear my words? I'll kill you. I'll shoot you on the spot if he doesn't eat. Today is Yom Kippur. We Jews don't eat. The Nazi pulled out a gun, held it to Schneeweiss's head. Schneeweiss didn't budge. The Nazi pulled the trigger, shot Schneeweiss. He fell down dead on the floor. The Bluzhever Rebbe afterwards said, Mi ka'am Yisrael. And I'd like to share with you what I take from that story. Here is a Jew who for years and years and years was Machalel Shabbos, desecrated every Yom Tov, ate on Yom Kippur, and didn't recognize what life was about. But deep, deep within him there was a very clear understanding. And in that one moment he put it into real action. And that is the human. We understand it and we don't. We get confused. We get so mixed up. And we're in this body and we're in this ever-changing state of murkiness. but there are moments of clarity, there are moments of getting it. When a person has one of those moments, you have to set your sight and you have to run by that, because that is the moment of understanding, and that is something that is rare. May Hashem grant us the wisdom, understanding, ability to put this into practice.